This year is the 5th annual Philadelphia Podcast Festival, and I could not be happier to be bringing Everything Is Awesome back for the 2nd year in a row. That's right, Everything Is Awesome Late Night comes back to the Philadelphia Podcast Fest at Tattooed Moms on Sunday, July 16th from 2 to 3 p.m., and it's going to be so much fun. We have Noah Houlihan on hand to talk about Plus 2 comedy, Game the Gamer. We have Brian Durkin to bring the funny. He's going to tell some jokes. We're going to talk podcasting, full belly laughs, and much, much more. Mike and I will be on hand to talk many things, play games. It's going to be just so much fun. Make sure you make your way out to the 5th annual Philadelphia Podcast Festival, especially from 2 to 3 at Tattooed Moms, so you can see Everything Is Awesome Late Night live.
Everything Is Awesome is part of Courts and Parts, a podcast network featuring pop culture, TV, movie, and geek podcasts. Check out some of our other shows, like TV Ate My Brain, Let's Chat with Revelin Friends, and Podstalgic at courtsandparts.com.
Awesome. Just tell people they're awesome and mean it.
Awesome.
Awesome. Awesome.
Did you have an awesome time? Did you drink awesome shooters and listen to awesome music and then just sit around and soak up each other's awesomeness?
Awesome. 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 That was awesome. You guys are awesome. No, you're awesome. No, you are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything Is Awesome. I am your host, Kev, and this is the show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. And at the time of this recording, I have no idea where we're at in the middle of this insane project for trying to talk to every Philadelphia podcaster. That's part of the Podcast Fest. But we're probably in the middle of a 2 to 3 episode a week release. I know that at the time of this recording, I'm not prepared for the Podcast Festival, but we'll see if this week's guest is during the course of our conversation. This week is, and I'm not sure, the Podcast Fest is the first time I've heard of this podcast and this podcaster. I'm interested to see, as I talk to these podcasts, if like the ratio of newbies to you just found out about the Podcast Fest. So please welcome to the show the host of Victims and Villains, Josh Berkey.
Yes. What's up?
All right. Hey, thanks for doing the show, man.
Anytime, man.
Generally, there's no real format to the show. There's lots of tangents that usually happen. I've been fortunate enough to actually kind of keep it reined in for these like Podcast Festival ones, because I have a deep interest in podcasting. I've been doing it. I don't know when this is airing, but I looked back at my records, and July 1st, 2007 was the very first published podcast I ever did. So right about now is my 10-year mark as far as recording goes. So I'm interested in I'm real big into podcasting, so I'm interested in like the history of other people when they got into podcasting. So where did podcasting originate for you? Like how long you've been doing it, and where did that love of wanting to host one start?
So I got into podcasting last year, and I went through a pretty tough season of some minor depression and anger, and really learning kind of how to be me and who I'm designed to be. And I started listening to this podcast called the Suicide Squadcast, and I was just listening to it, and I was like, these guys just sound like they have so much fun. And so what I started doing was, I was in a season, like I said, I was trying to be the best me that I could possibly be. And I don't know what you believe or whatever have you, but I was kind of getting back into my faith and really turning to God and saying, all right, well, what do you want from me? And I kind of started praying about, doing a podcast, as crazy as that might sound to some of the other listeners. But I ended up doing one with a buddy of mine, and I convinced him to do it. I was like, just do one with me. You don't have to, if you don't like it, we'll bury it. That'll be it. And so he was like, all right. So we got done talking, and we just talked. We got together over Skype, talked about nerd things and just kind of like news that was happening around that time. And he got done and was like, I love doing this. Let's keep it going. And about January of this year, he kind of stepped down from doing it. Like, still does it on occasion, but life got a little bit too crazy for him. And we had another co-host at another point that kind of came in around April or August of last year, and he's been doing more of his music career, so he's been kind of stepping down from it as well.
So what was that Suicide Squad podcast? What was that your first like podcast you started listening to, or have you been listening to other podcasts before that? Or
I'd been listening to podcasts for a while, and I remember kind of when podcasts were starting to become a thing. By the way, kudos to you for 10 years. I mean, that's impressive dedication right there.
That's pretty much. I mean, I want to say the podcasting game has been around for about 11 to 12 years.
Yeah.
As far as like what we know as a podcast by name, it's what they used to call them back in the day, like I guess before, Ricky Gervais or whatever. I think he was one of the guys that kind of put podcasting on the map with his show. But before they called it a podcast, it was called a webcast. So like all the radio stations, like even like back like 12, 13 years ago, like Kid Chris and some of the like Matt and Huggy and some of the other Philly guys, they would put clips of their shows up online and sometimes the full show without commercials. So it's always been around to some degree, but podcasting as by name, I think is about 11 to 12 years. And 10 years doing it is, let's just say, I found the creative fulfillment about a year and a half ago when I started this show. So it took a while.
Yeah, I'd imagine. That's the way it was with us for the first about 6 months. We just kind of got together, didn't really know what we were doing, kind of learned along the ways, and going back and listening to your first episodes, it's like watching a bad movie. and ironically enough, like our first episode is like I think within the top 10 viewed episodes on our iTunes account, which is kind of makes me like sad at the same time, but it's kind of like, well, it's cool that people are going back and going back and listening to. But 6 months into our identity, we actually we kind of started questioning, what's the point of doing this podcast if you're not going to do anything that's going to, draw attention to yourself. There's so much podcast. There's a podcast literally out there for like everything. And we wanted to do something that we hadn't seen yet, or that we had at least not had to come across. And so we reformatted our show to connect and educate people. So what we started doing was we actually started taking our taking that whole feedback of like, oh well, these are the things that are happening in the world of comics and film and video games and TV, but we did it with a purpose of raising awareness of suicide and educating people on the statistics of reality of suicide and depression and sexual assaults and addiction and just things like that. And that was really the heart. The more that we got into doing that, the more that we said, look, we want to step back and we want to connect people, because all three of us we've struggled with addiction or suicide or depression, and we believe and we know that the breakthrough is possible. Let's get it for those people out there that are listening to this.
Well, so there's I don't know how other podcast listeners are. Me myself, I tend to be completist. So like, if I start listening to a new show, depending on the format of the show, I might start like just at an episode that's current and then move back to episode 1. Or some shows I'm like, you know what, I think I'm going to be all in for this one, so I'll start at episode 1. So it's odd how important that first episode actually ends up being, but it's also, I think, a podcast audience now, like because it's been around for it's still in its infancy, but it's been around long enough that I think people, and there's so many of them, that people understand that in the beginning, especially the first handful of episodes, it's a big learning process, especially like if this is your first experience producing a show and putting it together and getting all the equipment put together and how you're going to figure it out? I mean, like I said, I'm 10 years in and I'm still kind of learning how to do certain things the right way. So it's always kind of a learning process, and I think the audience knows that now.
Yeah, and it's cool because like you can gradually hear the quality of the show getting better, and we just recently celebrated 52 episodes.
Oh, nice. Congrats.
In April, we're getting ready to put out episode 61 as of this recording. So
okay, cool. So you guys have been around for a little over a year then.
Yeah.
So you guys started then before the Podcast Fest last year. Did you guys know about the Podcast Fest last year, or just no clue about it?
I didn't know about it until like July. One of the festivals, one of the entries into the festival last year, I can't even remember their name right now. I think it's I want to say it's Superhero Speak. I was listening to those guys, and they had announced it, and at that point I was like, all right, well, I'm pretty sure that if they're advertising it now that submissions are closed for it. And I happened to come across an article on Twitter one day this year, and they were like, submissions are due, and they were due that day of, and I was like, all right, well, if it's if it's in the cards for us, if it's in the will, it'll happen. And sure enough, we got an email, and I was like, man, this is like awesome.
Well, I know, and like, so Nate and Tegan, who are great, they've been running the Philadelphia Podcasting Society and the Philadelphia Podcast Festival for the last 5 years. Well, I know the fest for 5 years. I don't know when the society formed, but I've been chatting with them since last year, because this, as much as I've been doing podcasts for 10 years, and we used to do live shows way back in the day. But the community was, for podcasting, especially in like local community, wasn't very large up until probably about 2 or 3 years ago, I would say, because I know I had a buddy who did a podcast during the very first Podcast Fest, and it was very low attendance, but again, learning curves that Nathan and Tegan had to go through to put together something. And it's been progressing each year, and more shows are finding out about it. I think more and more shows are starting to become, start up here in the Philly area or the suburbs and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, it's their goal. I don't know if their goal is necessarily quality control, because they always say that they put like everything's on us as podcasters to get our audience out there, which is probably true of like even the big names that have that are part of other festivals. But one thing that I really like about the Philly Podcast Fest compared to like the DC Podcast Fest and I think the Chicago one I've looked at recently and the New York Podcast Fest is that they all charge a ticket price. This is the first year that Philadelphia Podcast Fest is charged, and they're only charging for certain shows. So that's one of the things I like about the Podcast Fest, is that their idea, at least the way it comes across to me, is that their idea is just to get as many shows together as possible to kind of show that Philadelphia is a really good Philadelphia podcasting market. So it's really exciting that we got 55 plus shows this year. It's insane how big it is this year.
That's awesome.
And it's great. So so you're one of the newbies, which was where I was last year with it. And it's interesting because I would say I know some shows aren't returning to the Podcast Fest, so it seems like there's a 50-50 split roughly of like newbies and guys who's done it at least a year, 1 year if not more. So have you guys thought, and that I'm assuming so, because you guys already have evolved your show once, which I think is always a good thing to do. Even if it doesn't necessarily mean switching up format. Sometimes it does, and probably in most cases it does. But kind of like evolving your show to be new and different and fresh all the time is something that you have to do to kind of either keep your audience or grow your audience. Have you guys thought about what you're doing for the live show and how you're going to kind of to make it stand out different than your pre-recorded shows?
So we've done live events before, actually.
Okay.
And usually for live events, we vary on what we're gonna do. So we've done everything from speaking in churches and using biblical knowledge and bringing it into the whole thing with teaching people about what hope is and what necessarily what we do kind of thing. And then we did a comic convention in Allentown this year where we did a panel, and the theme of the convention was 1987. So what we ended up doing was we found a New York Times article that was about 4 teenagers who had committed this mass suicide in a parking garage, and we had kind of talked about how the effects of that had kind of played on this small community, and like the effects that this tragedy kind of brought out. And it was all this, people were starting to take mental health more seriously after that. And we kind of talked about how mental health it's a serious thing. And so right now for the podcast festival, we have ideas that we want to do, and we've reached out to a couple of groups that we want to do the show with us, to kind of put the spotlight on what they do, that they're also in the same arena of mental health awareness of what we do, and the hope and the connections and the education. And we just haven't, unfortunately, had anything back yet. Mm-hmm. So it's still in the planning process right now, which is kind of bad because we're a month away from that. But we're if all else comes to fail, we'll do what we always do. We get up, and we've done everything from speaking at punk rock shows to speaking at conventions, or doing one-on-one things with people in malls, so on and so forth. So.
Well, don't feel bad about not having it prepped yet. I mean, I have maybe half my show prepped, and that's only because someone contacted me and said, "Hey, I want to be your stand-up comedian for the night." I was like, "Oh, okay, great." So I didn't even do anything for the show yet to prep myself. And as I've done more and more of these live shows, I've become very comfortable in kind of putting it off because I'm a huge procrastinator anyway. So it's, but I think the art of podcasting, and you guys have already kind of hit all your major milestones that you kind of need to hit to know that you're going to be in it for the long haul, because not many podcasts hit 10 episodes, and then out of those ones that do, not many hit 50. So you guys are really, it's at the point where it's just when it becomes boring for you is when you're probably going to want to stop. But it sounds like you guys, are finding cool ways to keep it interesting, and that's what, the live shows are great for that. And I think what makes podcasting so great is that we have to, kind of think of on our toes sometimes. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that kind of, makes your live show or whatever. I think it gives it, it makes it a little bit more special when you have to think on your toes a little bit.
Yeah, and a portion of our show is constant reinvention almost, because a portion of what we do is we bring on guests. So we've had everyone from independent filmmakers to independent comic makers, musicians. We've had a couple of YouTube personalities come on. We just had an animator from Land Before Time and Space Jam on last week. We also had a local LGBT advocate. So we've done so many different things, and that's constant. So when we're booking for guests for the regular show, it's always kind of all right, well, how's we never want to book 2 comic creators on the same show, because that's their same field. Let's do a creator and YouTube personality, or let's do music, or But then when we first started getting into podcasting, it was all we would always bring on musicians, and it was always well, let's try and get away from doing musicians. And now we're trying to we've become so I don't want to say big, but we've made a name for ourselves among we're starting to make a name for ourselves among the independent comic community, and so now it's like, all right, well, let's try and make a name for ourselves in the independent, film scene as well, and an independent video game scene. So it's really been around there, because not with all of those, bringing all those in, they're bringing in their audience to your show.
Yeah.
And those are people that have probably never heard of our show, which is awesome, because in hearing of our show, you never get to, it's always like, all right, well, what's this show about? Yeah, I'm going to listen to it because I know, this person, and, oh, this is a suicide awareness. I know someone who might be struggling with this. Let me pass this on to them. Let me get them this information.
It's, yeah, I mean, you guys are, out of all the shows I've ever done, and actually most of the shows that I know about and listen to, you guys sound like you're the only ones that actually have like kind of like a good mission behind it, where you're out there actually trying to help people instead of us, like me just being, let me just make random jokes or just talk to somebody. There's no mission behind this except that I just like to talk to people and it makes me feel good. That's the only mission.
But it's okay, because you have the Mean Girls. You have a Mean Girls sound clip in your theme song, so it's all good.
Yes, it's. I'll tell you, it's when I put that theme song together. I was like, I did the clips because I didn't feel like paying anyone to do a theme song for us. I wasn't really ready for it, and I've had people come and tell me, like, sometimes I listen to your show and I'll rewind the intro like 5 to 10 times just as I love your intro, which is like a little happy accident that happened with this show. I think kind of like, because it took a long time to find those clips that all had the word awesome in it or were like a big dialogue of awesome.
Oh, I believe you, because our show does something similar. A friend of mine from Oklahoma had put together had unused tracks from bands, and he was like, you guys can use these if you want for, because, supporting what you guys do. And so we found this one clip that's like a little bit of a slower song, and our show's all about hope for the suicidal. So we went through pop culture and we found just random clips from we have 2 X-Files clips. We have a clip of speaking, doing a live event. We have a clip from The Flash and Man of Steel that all have, they all have something to do with the word hope. And ours isn't as long as yours, but doing I think ours is 30 seconds to maybe 40 seconds, but it still took a good hour and a half to get everything paced right and get all the balancing act just right.
So you mentioned the Flash. I'm assuming we're talking about the CW's Flash.
Yes.
Oh my God! So that show is just full of hope. What's weird though is I feel like you're contradicting yourself when you talk about Man of Steel, because that is just a terrible movie.
See, you say that, but I am a DC advocate. I love DC Comics, and we actually just got ready to, again, don't know when this is going up, but if any of your listeners do like DC Comics and want to be educated a little bit more in the field of suicide prevention, we just launched a second and third show, one of them being all about DC Comics.
I have no problem with DC Comics. I grew up as more of a Marvel kid, and then obviously took the break that most boys take when they think they're too cool for comics, and then got back into it around 06, 07. And then I'm back to I have kids now, so now my money goes elsewhere. But I did get into in my adult life. I got back into DC a little bit, and so I have no problem with DC Comics. I have problem with the Zack Snyder stuff. It's up until Wonder Woman, I was real worried about the DCEU in the movies.
I mean, to each their own. I loved the optimism, but I also loved I'm not sure if you watch documentaries or not. There was a great documentary that came out a couple years ago called The Death of Superman. The Death of Superman, what happens? Or The Death of Superman Lives, what happens?
Yes. Yeah, I don't know if I've watched the whole... Did I watch that whole thing? I may have. I know I watched a good chunk of it because Kevin Smith was talking about it, and that he brought it to my attention.
And they did, like, they kind of go through, like, the entire process of, like, you know, conception to death. And a lot of the, like, the elements from it, like, Zack Snyder actually you can see in the Zack Snyder Man of Steel. And see, I'm a guy that, like, I've enjoyed most of Zack Snyder's films. Like, there have been a couple that I don't like, but as far as, like, you know, the DCEU films, I'm all for it.
The Man of Steel is one that it seems like there is a good split on, you know, from people that I talk to, much more so than Batman versus Superman. That seems to be generally panned for being awful. But I'll tell you what, I finally saw that movie. Batman vs. Superman is a movie that by title I should be seeing in the theater right away, no questions asked. And the trailer did so much disservice to that movie because I ended up watching it on HBO a couple weeks ago with zero expectations. It was more so I put it on, I was like, I don't feel well, I'll put this on, I'll fall asleep, all will be well. And I stayed. It had my attention. I'm not saying it's a good movie by any stretch of the imagination because I don't think it is, personally, Batman vs. Superman. I think it has good parts. I think that we got a good Batman out of that movie. We got a good Wonder Woman out of that movie. We had a couple good scenes. But overall, it was just all over the place.
Anytime that conversation happens, I'm always like, did you see the original version or the ultimate version?
And that's something that recently, as I've been talking about it with people, they asked me if I saw the theater version. And that's what I think HBO is showing the theater version because it's HBO. I don't think they're showing the director's cut or whatever. I've heard that the extended cut is like 100 times better.
It is because when you like, because I loved the movie and I saw the movie in theaters 5 times.
Oh my god,
dude! I loved it. Like I loved it, and I'm not ashamed to say that.
I can't believe there's an audience for that movie. Like, it is, but you're right. To each their own. Like, there are, I mean, Kevin Smith, you know, I don't know if you listen to any of his podcasts, but he's a huge, you know, he has said that the movie's not great, but he's also a big fan of that movie. Like, he'd rather have a crappy comic book movie than no movie at all. And I totally get that. And I try to watch everything with like super positive eyes. And like I said, I when I was done watching that movie, like, my expectations were so low that it wasn't terrible. Like, I would probably, if I passed it again on TV, I might stay and hang out and watch it for a little bit.
But the director's cut compared to the theatrical version, it's weird because just the spots that they edit, they don't make any sense, like, at all. And when you see the theatrical version and then you go back and immediately watch, or like, say 1 week you watch the theatrical version, and then the following week, or like, you know, 5 or 7 days later, you go back and watch the ultimate version, you're like, why did these cuts made? Like, these are the dumbest edits in history. And I think they got more money hungry for that film than actual storytelling, because when the edits were done and the story feels more complete, like they edit like 15 seconds here, 30 seconds here, but when you do that, it really takes away from your story. And that's why the whole, you know, like, Lex Luthor, you know, twist and his whole plan, like, it doesn't make sense. You're like, all right, well, I guess I'm piecing that together with this and that, and then, but when you watch it in the director's cut, it makes so much more sense. Like, you can see clearly, all right, well, this is where this happened, this is where this happened, this is where this happened.
Yeah, I'll have to watch that director's cut, because you're probably like the 5th person that said go watch that, because it is better. But like I said, for me, like, like seeing Wonder Woman was it breathed good. They needed that movie to be critically accepted, because the DCEU, even like every trailer, I would say every trailer save for Batman vs Superman, has actually been a good trailer for all their movies. And I've just, for me, being not a huge fan of that universe right now, I feel like I was suckered every single time. So when the Wonder Woman trailer hits, it reminds me of Captain America: First Avenger because it's a period piece, and I was excited for it, but I was like, I don't know if I can see this movie. Like, I've been burned so many times, I had to go see it because of I think what it means to cinema in general, it's just that I feel like they should be building that universe off of the back of that movie. Have you seen Wonder Woman yet?
Yeah. My wife and I actually saw it last week, and she said the same thing. Like, we went down and I spoke at a church in Norfolk the Saturday before we went to go see it, and we all went out to dinner afterwards, and everyone's like, have you seen Wonder Woman yet? Have you seen Wonder Woman? Because I ended up actually preaching on Wonder Woman, and everyone was like, I was like, I haven't. We're going to see it this Monday, and my wife is exactly like you are in saying, well, I have low expectations for these things, so I'm just going to walk in with it. And she walked out of that movie, she went in with low expectations, didn't watch any of the trailers, except, if they would play them on, Hulu or, Facebook or YouTube or whatever have you, she wouldn't go out of her way to watch them. She would just happen to see them. And she ended up really, really loving it. And I think, again, they learned a lot from Batman v Superman, because the second trailer that you had for it, you had Doomsday. This one, you have, obviously, spoiler alert, doesn't really give away too much, but you have Ares. Mm-hmm. And if you know anything about Wonder Woman, in order to have a Wonder Woman movie be successful, you have to either have Ares or you have to have Cheetah. Like, those are her two biggest nemesis. Yeah. And they ironically pulled out, an older villain is Dr. Poison. Yeah, Dr. Poison was actually one of her older ones. So when you do a period piece about the 40s, obviously, if you're going to do something about, World War I, I guess 1918 was the year. If you're going to do something about that, you have to do Ares. It only makes sense. And she walked out, loved it.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think I just posted today, but it was supposed to be last week's episode, at least as of this recording. And I sat down and talked to my buddy Garrett Smith, who he's a big movie guy, big movie buff, and he's been for years now kind of preaching that we need more of this. We need more, women leading movies, whether they're comedies or action or whatever. So he was one of the guys I wanted to talk to. And then there's this actress out in L.A., Casey Spivey, who I had on previously, and we just went on a kind of a tangent about women being represented in Hollywood and whatnot. And so I sat down and talked to both of them. And it's interesting because as much as I love this film, and I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was when my son was born or right around when he was, in utero at least. But around that time, about 5 to 6 years ago, I started getting really emotional at movies. So Chasing Amy is a movie that I always cry at, no matter what, for as long as I can remember. I've always cried, but that was one of the few. That or any movie that has an animal that gets hurt. They were the only movies that would ever affect me that way. But I want to say the first non-animal movie or non-Chasing Amy movie to affect me, and it sounds so dopey, and it is. It's 100% dopey, but it was the Muppet movie with Jason Segel. Kermit has some speech that's I don't know, really uplifting, and it literally brought me to tears. To which my fiance made fun of me appropriately, but there's a lot of movies usually get me that way now, and it was strange because Wonder Woman, I didn't walk out of feeling, I didn't have that kind of emotion. It didn't. I loved the movie. It has nothing to do with the fact that I didn't like the movie at all. And I was talking to Casey Spivey about it, and it was interesting because we were talking about how, she's never connected to a superhero movie that way before, where like she saw Guardians of the Galaxy, and like she liked it, she loved it, but didn't connect to it the way where I did, and where I wept at the fact that in the first one, Peter's mom is dying, and in the second, have you seen the second Guardians movie?
Oh yeah, we saw it twice in theaters.
So I wept, and these are all spoilers. My fans should probably know this, or my listeners. I don't want to call them fans. That makes me sound like a huge dick. My listeners, they should know by now. This is just going to be all spoilers, but spoilers for any new listeners. The Guardians, like the whole thing about his dad, and it really at the end when Yondu is kicks it. And that speech that he kind of has at the end, saying that you don't know what you have until it's too late or whatever. Like that got me. That made me crying. And it's interesting that these movies, like, we needed Wonder Woman because we needed something for our for women in general, and for me, someone who I also have a daughter, like for the future generation, for my daughter to have a movie to emotionally connect to the way I do to Guardians.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm right there with you. Like I've always been. It's weird because like since my wife and I have been together for probably about 5 years now, and she's like, we're like totally opposite when it comes to movies. Mm-hmm. So like finding a movie for us to like watch is like really hard.
Yeah, I get that.
And I've always been like the guy that like I love like chick flicks and like, but yet at the same time, like I can do like, I've been working my way through the original Nightmare on Elm Street series. So like my top 5 holds everything from like Mean Girls to New Nightmare and Batman Forever, as much as people give me crap about that.
What?
dude I grew up on that movie, and so for me, it's not only nostalgic, but I've also, the novelization by Peter David actually features the original. Most people didn't know. Most people look at that film for what it is, and they're like, well, that one and Batman and Robin, pure garbage. I'll give you Batman and Robin. I can still watch it. But Batman Forever was just one that I looked at, and the way that their take on Bruce Wayne in that film, with the psychology of Two-Face and him connecting to Dick, was very psychological, and that's the way that I've always looked at it. And the original take for the film was actually a lot darker, and it was actually a lot longer. Most people don't know that. They cut about 45 minutes of the film, and the original version of the film, which if you get on Amazon, you can actually get a novelization, shipping and all, for like probably like $4.
Oh wow.
$4 or $5. Peter David, I highly recommend that. But it's an original take on what the original script looked like, and the original script was darker. It developed the Bruce Wayne and explained a little bit more about why Edward Nygma was so fascinated with the Bruce Wayne character. Mm-hmm. Because he's just like, in the beginning you're like, oh, this guy, he's just a fanboy, but he has a purpose for why he is a fanboy.
That's intriguing. You probably sound like you're about like in your mid 20s or so, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
So we have, I'm 30. I'll be 33 this year. So we have almost a generation, I guess, or half a generation between us. I have never ever heard anyone say that Batman Forever was one of their favorite movies. I love that generation of Batman movies, as far as I'll watch all 4 of them and I enjoy, because I mean, when Batman Forever came out, I was probably about 10 to 12 years old, somewhere in that range. I enjoyed it as a kid. That movie was marketed to kids with all the bright lights and flashiness and whatnot.
Right.
Unlike the Tim Burton movies, I would never say that they were like I would my son who's 5, and I probably saw that movie when I was about not much older, 6 or 7, the original Batman from 1989. My son would be so scared of that movie, 100% scared of that movie, because they are, I mean, not compared to Nolan, but for its time is a dark movie, and I think a dark movie even today for anyone under the age of probably like 10 years old. But so I do like in fact I might even own all 4 of them on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever. I enjoy them for what they are. Never would say favorite movie. But Keaton is my favorite Batman. Like, he's my Batman. Who would you call your Batman?
I would say probably... Oh, that's a tough one. I would probably say Michael Keaton, just because I enjoyed his take on it. But I'm still like being particular to Batman Forever. Like, it's always a tie depending on my mood, because I'm always like, well, it could be Keaton, it could be Kilmer. Like, I liked Kilmer's take on it.
That's such an interesting because like everyone I've talked to, like that kind of the dances between Gen Xer and millennial, and somewhere in that range, it's either like Keaton or Bale. Like, I don't think not many people say Kilmer or Clooney. I don't think anyone says Clooney. But and you know what, I'll agree that I don't think Kilmer was a bad Batman. Like, I've seeing it as an adult, like the problem with that movie is not the acting, really. Like, it's Schumacher. He's the problem.
Well, the reason that it turned out the way that it did versus the way that it was originally intended for was because of the dark themes and the darkness, the color palette, obviously, of Batman Returns. Yeah. Because I think they had too many children say, or too much parents say, this movie is scary. You couldn't market it as well. So if you have stuff that's bright and neon and 90s, the way that those movies were, you can market it better. So I think that they did that. Again, I think that's going back to that whole Batman v Superman argument. It's sacrificing, quality for money. Yeah, really.
Oh, and absolutely. Like, I want to say that there was like one of the issues was that like they couldn't make McDonald's toys for Batman Returns, and that I think was like because of they couldn't market toys was the whole reason for that shift, and that was either something that like I just heard on one of the Kevin Smith podcasts, or it's something that may even be in. No, it's not in that documentary, but it's in something. I've definitely heard that, like, I don't like non-Kevin Smith world. I've heard that somewhere before in some sort of Batman documentary. So it's, but yeah, it's those Batmans have a special place in my heart, much like the '66 Batman, which like did you ever watch the '66 Batman when as a kid, like on reruns?
I did. I grew up and I loved it, and then I hit 13 and I was like, this is garbage.
I've actually never said that was good. I mean, I guess I always kind of like understood the campiness of it, and like for what it was, I always appreciated it. And I actually I haven't seen it in years, and with the we're recording this a day after Adam West's passing. He passed away yesterday.
No, he passed on Saturday, so this would have been 2 days after. Yes.
So but mere days after Adam West's passing, like, it does make me want to go back and rewatch those some of those episodes, because it was like, I would say even more so than the Tim Burton stuff, because as a 5-year-old my dad could sit me down and watch Adam West Batman versus Tim Burton Batman.
Yeah, and I mean, it had like so much lighthearted themes, and not even, I think I was just talking about this with someone today, that like Adam West, yes, to our parents he was Batman, but I think to our generations, you saying that we're like generation apart, we're like 8 years difference, but whatever. you have to us, he was Grey Ghost from Batman the Animated Series. He was the mayor of Quahog. He is he was Catman in Fairly Odd Parents. Like, so he was the principal for Pete and Pete. So I mean, he's definitely been influential, not only in our parents' generation, but that Batman '89 film really revolutionized the way that people saw him, because that's all people saw him after the '66 Batman was Bruce Wayne, Batman, and he was typecast. And then he got to do so many amazing things right after that movie.
Yeah, it is a shame that he's gone, because he's he definitely did not embrace it for a long time, but in the last I'd say decade or so, the last 10 years or so, he really started embracing his Batman role and what his place in pop culture was, which was he kind of just I don't want to say comedic genius, but he was really just a funny dude and just really good at his craft. And it's a shame that he was working up until he passed, though, because he was still doing voice work. Yeah, so it's a shame. It's Batman is the one. So, what's your take on Batfleck? Are you a fan of Ben Affleck?
I love Ben Affleck as Batman. I knew before seeing Ben Affleck as Batman that he was gonna kill it from watching him in Gone Girl.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think I was one of the one of the few. There weren't many people that before Batman vs Superman came out were a fan of him as Batman. But I've just been I've watched every Kevin Smith movie, so anything he's been in with Kevin Smith, and then from there, I've obviously watched some other movies of Ben Affleck, yeah, when they announced that, I was like, that just makes sense. He seems like Bruce Wayne to me, and like I said, to me, he was one of the best parts. Him and Gal Gadot.
Gadot, yeah.
Gadot. They both were the highlights of Batman versus Superman, and it's I'm so glad that there's going to be a generation of kids that say that my Batman is Ben Affleck, because I think he crushes it more than Bale did. I think he's a much better Batman than Bale.
I'll give you that. I think for what he was given, I think in that film, the warehouse scene is, I think, the one scene that most Bat fans have been like, this is the scene that I've been dying to see, and I've never seen it. And, that's the one thing that we wanted to see for, so many years, because that's the way that he has been in the comics. And so many people had so many problems with him because, the whole Batman doesn't kill.
But I get that, and I think I kind of let go of that because I know what universe we're in, and it's a lot of my issues with Man of Steel is that Superman broke Zod's neck, and even Jonathan Kent, I was not a fan of how he was. How he was portrayed in the film. I think Kevin Costner did a great job, but I wasn't a fan of a lot of the things in Man of Steel, and taking it away from what from what I know as Superman. I can kind of respect that film. It's not my Superman. It's not what I would have done. But it's knowing that universe, knowing that that's what we're kind of coming from, it's we can say Batman doesn't kill, and yeah, I would say it's probably, especially in the comics, you can say he never kills, but there's plenty of instances in the movies where he may not directly kill somebody, but he is causing a lot of havoc trying to do whatever he needs to do to stop the bad guy, and people are dying. So I can forgive that. It's like I said, we're in the Snyderverse there, so it's just something I kind of wrote off as whatever.
Yeah, and but that's just, I feel like people just, as negative as it's gonna sound, I feel like people look for things to hate in DC.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because it's not Marvel. I remember the whole back in April, you had the whole Wonder Woman shaved arm conflict, and it was like, really, this is what you consider controversy?
See, for me, it's not necessarily because the Marvel films, like, I obviously am a fan of the Marvel films. I think the problem I have with the Marvel films now is that they're so, like, there's a formula now, and there's so many of them. There's 3 a year, so I don't necessarily go to the theater and watch every Marvel film anymore. Like, I skipped out on Ant-Man, I skipped out on Doctor Strange. I waited a couple weeks to go see Guardians. Like, I would say really, and even, like, I guess I was excited for Guardians, but I would say the real, like, Marvel, the Marvel Prime, I guess we'll say, like, with all the Avengers. The first Avengers movie that I've been really excited to see in a long time is this new Thor movie, because it just looks so crazy bananas that it's awesome. But I have not been excited for the last few, save for Captain America: Civil War. They just there's too many of them, I think, and there's a formula now, and you kind of know, like, what's going to happen ahead of time. But I am a huge Marvel fan, but that's not my reason why I have my opinions on DC. I just don't think I'm not a fan of what they're doing up until Wonder Woman, but their TV universe, which is what kind of sparked this whole conversation and tangent we've been on, the Berlantiverse is amazing. I talk about it a lot. It is hands down, I think, my favorite thing on television right now. When you talking about the whole universe as a whole, and then, to break it down, I think The Flash and Supergirl are the two of the best of the four that are on there. And talk about this all kind of spun out from talking about hope on your show and whatnot, and, like, those two shows are all about hope, in my opinion.
I would agree with you to an extent. There are aspects of those shows that I enjoy, but I get into, like, people discredit me and disown me for this, but I'm more of an Arrow guy, the show that started it all.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, especially this past season, it kind of returned to where I think it should be. And my problem with season 4 wasn't necessarily the Felicity stuff. Because I was in it week after week, and I was like, all right, well, it's not what it was, but it's still, I still enjoy it. It was really the season finale for season 4 of Arrow it was the Dark Knight Rises, really, is what they did. And
exactly, yeah.
But like I said, they were able to come back in season 5, and I think kind of return to where the show was at least at season 3. I agree with you. I think I love the entire Berlantiverse. I never want to see any one of those shows get canceled.
I mean, it's on CW. Look where, like, you look where Supernatural is. So I don't think we have anywhere to go.
But yeah, for me, I don't know why I think I just prefer the Flash because it hits me more emotionally. Like, I don't really ever feel the emotions that I feel on the Flash for Arrow. Or even like Legends is more of just like a fun thing. That's like just a fun time travel romp. They don't get too invested with, like, the heartstrings and making you feel all the feels. But the Flash, I think, does it the best with all the feels, and I think Supergirl does it a close second. Like, I want to say for the first, I mean, I've cried during the Flash probably at least 3 or 4 times, and Supergirl,
same, yeah.
Supergirl, I cried, I think, for the first time at this last season finale for season 2, and yeah, I don't know. As much as I talk crap on the DC as far as their movies are concerned, I show so much love for those TV shows. I think now I haven't watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in forever, but I guess that just says that I like the CW stuff better. I would say the only thing that might be better than the CW stuff is the Netflix stuff for Marvel, but that's also like a whole nother league. Like, I don't think they're the same things. Like, it's hard to compare the two.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because you have, like, the tone is more consistent with those shows, and whereas I feel like with you have more variety and more differences with the CW shows because Supergirl and Flash, like you said, like they overflow with hope.
Yeah.
and brightness, and then you have the Arrow, which is, you know, the DC, this DC, you know, Batman styled of vigilante adventure, darker, you know, more grounded feel in that sense as well. Then you have Legends, which is just this like this fun, you know, romp there where it's just like let's introduce as much, you know, travel to as much different time periods as we can, introduce as much DC mythology as we can. But then you have you know, you have the Daredevils and the Punishers and the Jessica Jones, and you have all of these other things, you know, Iron Fist and so on and so forth, and they're like all around consistently dark.
Yeah.
More darker toned, and they definitely have just been consistent with that. And I think that that's the thing that Marvel has really done very well, is just they just have consistency in almost all their properties.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, reading about Wonder Woman for the last week or so, just because I always like keeping up with, because it's just so good. It's a movie I actually really want to see again. I want to see it with, because I will say that I walked into it with higher expectations after like reading all the reviews. So like I did walk out with, I don't want to say disappointed, but I walked out saying that I pumped myself up too much for this movie, but I still really enjoyed it. So I do want to go and see that movie without like, you know, any kind of weight on my shoulders of seeing it. But I love to read about these movies after I see them, and one of the consistent things that you can read about is that, you know, Marvel has a formula, and you know, it's obviously working. They make it work for them. DC was trying to do that with you know, Zack Snyder kind of being involved and setting this grittier tone, and I think what we saw with Wonder Woman is that, you know, you let Patty Jenkins do her job, and you get a wonderful film. You know, don't get in the creator's way. But yeah, Marvel is, I mean, you can't stop them now. They know what they're doing.
I'm still surprised that they're still under Disney. I don't know how that contract all works out, but I think that, you know, now that we're a year away from the big Thanos finale, you know, 10 years in the making. Like, I'm still surprised that they're still under Disney, and, you know, they're not, you know, their own studio by this time, because they're big enough and they do enough cash at the box office that they could very well be their own property.
I think that's because Disney legitimately owns them now. Like, they were, I think, you know, I think it was after Iron Man, if I remember correctly, like Disney straight up just bought Marvel Comics and Marvel Studios, and that's just part of the, you know, House of Mouse now. I think the only way Marvel leaves is if Disney sells them. I don't think they can leave any other way.
I think so. I think you're right, but I do remember like either reading something or hearing something about like a year or so ago where there were rumblings of, you know, Marvel trying to buy themselves, you know, out of Disney, to kind of stand on their own. And you gotta look like they have the power to do that. Like, if they want to do that, I mean, granted, Our show deals a lot with independent comics, so I read a lot more independent comics than I do, you know, mainstream comics. But they're from what I've been hearing, there's been a lot of praise for the DC comics since Rebirth happened a little over a year ago, and now Marvel's pretty much been like sucking butt from what I hear.
Yeah, I also, like I said earlier, I don't read comics too often anymore, just because of the cost involved with it, and I'd rather spend all my money on podcasting related things. But yeah, I mean, that right around even the New 52. I mean, I only read the Batman stuff by Scott Snyder.
So good.
It was so good, and that's when I knew like they were really kind of. They were about to kind of crush Marvel when it comes to comics, and yeah, I mean I'm really just kind of talking, you know, talking out my ass, because I really don't know, because I don't read them anymore. I want to, and I will eventually pick. I actually am planning on picking up some trades probably next week, but yeah, it's. I think you're right. I think Marvel, like the thing that like getting with Disney helped them with was getting the cash flow to make all those movies. And now that they generate their own money and they have a formula, and you know, Kevin Feige or whatever, he's really, you know, he's the guy that's kind of keeping that ship afloat. They could totally, if they could find a way to buy themselves out, they would 100% be able to survive on their own now.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at, because you probably really have to look at, there's TV, you have animation and big screen, and then you have comic books. I think 75% of all of those properties DC wins because they put out better animated material.
Yep.
They put out better TV shows. Yep. They put out better stories. Yeah. And I think that it says a lot about the property as a whole, the company as a whole. Just yes, they've been scared for quite some time about, you know, the whole cinematic universe thing, and you know, their first couple outings weren't really that impressive, you know, to most people. Some, or you know, you depending on who you ask. But I think that they're getting ready to. I think Wonder Woman's a change of tide, and I think that same hope and optimism that was so prevalent throughout that film, you can watch the Justice League trailers, and you can see that. Like, you don't, to watch a Justice League trailer and then to watch a Batman v Superman trailer, it almost feels like those two films exist in different worlds.
Oh, absolutely. Like, and I think that's something that they consciously realized that, like, people were so against after seeing Batman versus Superman, and I think that was I think there's a shift. I think they probably started Justice League planning it out to be in that dark, gritty world, and they realized that's just not what people want. People don't want that, and like, really, who does? Like, I mean, I get it. It's there for people do want it, and there is, you know, 20%, 25% of the people out there actually they enjoyed that movie and they enjoyed what they saw, and you know, and I would say that I can enjoy a movie that's dark and gritty and really enjoy it, but like, when I go to the movies, a lot of times for me it's just that I want to escape the BS in the real world and have like an hour and a half, 2.5 hours of just like of fun. Like, really, like it's or, you know, even if I'm seeing a horror movie, like, that's, you know, I'm getting some sort of enjoyment out of that, to where, you know, I'm just escaping for an hour and a half from the real life to see some crazy stuff. So I think that's, you know, DC's probably realized that's what's happening with Wonder Woman, that's why people responded so well, and even if Justice League Part 1 or whatever they're calling it doesn't get it completely right, I think it's going to be much more hopeful than BVS was, and I think the whole universe is going to start taking that shift, you know, immediately. Whenever the next film is that's getting filmed is I'm sure already, you know, okay, let's
Aquaman.
Yeah. And that, like, how crazy is that we're getting an Aquaman film that's probably going to be pretty good. Like, I'm pretty excited about that one.
If you want to, like, read, the people, like, are talking about how, like, you know, the big thing about Comic-Con trailer last year that we got was, 2016 is where the Aquaman trailer jokes are coming to die. It was no. Aquaman jokes came to die in 2011 when Jeff Johns picked up a pen and started writing Aquaman for the New 52. Like, the first arc for the New 52, Aquaman, The Trench, it's a straight horror film. I mean, on page, it's a straight, horrifyingly dark, awesome, glorious story.
Yeah, I've heard that because that was going to be a book I picked up when I was reading Batman's New 52, because the New 52 is what made me start reading DC, because I was like, oh, this is a good place for me to, like, kind of jump in and whatnot, and yeah, I do want to go back and read some of that Aquaman stuff because I've heard a lot of good things about it.
Yeah, and, like, just, yeah, it's very Creature from the Black Lagoon-ish brought into our world, that first arc, and then that second arc, like, Aquaman, you know, it introduces new breath into the Aquaman mythology. Aquaman had a Justice League of his own, and now Black Manta's going off and killing them one by one because he's trying to get revenge. And just some of the things that Jeff Johns did, like it flows so beautifully, and his storytelling to that character, like Aquaman controls 75% of the planet, and yet we think we just think of him from those 70s cartoons.
Yeah.
Or, the way Big Bang, painted him, Aquaman sucks water. Like, but you read the comics and no, he doesn't. Like, he's a pretty cool character.
Yeah, and I don't know how he was pre-New 52. I assume he was kind of a little bit of a joke. I mean, that's how he got that reputation even in the 70s and whatnot. But I'm up for it because like it's it's just like Wonder Woman was different, and just like Black Panther is going to be different. Like Aquaman, is going to be different. It's and that's what I want. I don't want it's kind of why I'm getting tired of some of the Marvel movies, because it's sometimes just the same thing over and over again, and unless it's the new Thor movie, which looks like Lethal Weapon in space with the buddy cop. I'm so excited for that movie.
That's a great way to explain it.
That's how I've been explaining it to people lately. I was like, how could you not love this movie? Like, I haven't even seen it yet, but it's literally going to be a buddy cop movie. It's a Lethal Weapon in space. I'm so excited. I don't know that I've been happier I haven't been this happy for a movie since like the original Guardians movie a couple of years ago. So I'm really stoked for that one. That's gonna be my jam for sure. That trailer is just, it makes me like, I get happy goosebumps watching that trailer.
Yeah, I think I watched that trailer like 3 or 4 times. Like within the first 10 minutes it was released, I was like, I can't believe a Thor movie looks this good.
And not only that, but after seeing Chris Hemsworth in the new Ghostbusters, which is, I have feelings about that movie. I guess I think for the most part I liked it more than I hated it. And it wasn't for the people involved; it was the script that had issues. But seeing him in that comedic role, I was like, wow, Chris Hemsworth is really funny. And then we got to see the Thor roommate thing, that short, or the 2 shorts that we got out of that, and that's really funny. And just seeing them kind of let him giving a big old injection of humor to the Thor franchise. It's kind of like it's reinventing itself, that Thor character. I'm just so excited. It is, like I said, the first thing since Guardians a few years ago that's got me real excited about a Marvel movie.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the 2 Thor movies we've gotten this far. Thor's definitely been my favorite of the MCU, aside from, he's right below Guardians because Chris Pratt, and just all the talent that they got involved in there. But when they announced this, I was like, they just showed the title card, and I was like, I don't even know what this is about, and I'm already excited. Take my money now.
Thor was the first Thor movie was a happy surprise for me, because I went to go see it and I was like, it's Thor. This isn't going to be good. And I was like, it was that low expectation and walking out really happy about seeing that movie. And it's Captain America is more my bag. I don't think it gets better than Winter Soldier. I think Winter Soldier is a really just tight film. It's not, I wouldn't say, I think Guardians, it's hard to, again, Guardians is a hard movie to compare with the rest of the MCU because it's so different. And that's a big ball of fun, really, both those movies, whereas with Winter Soldier is not a big ball of fun. But I think as a film, as a movie on its own, not thinking about it as a comic book movie, I think Winter Soldier is one of the best things the MCU has ever put out. But yeah, I think this Thor could actually top it, even though it's going to be nothing similar. It's going to be just a fun ride.
Yeah, and they definitely made, I think Winter Soldier is a great canvas to saying, comic book movies don't have to be just comic book movies, because you look at that film and you can't call it a comic book movie. You have to call it a political thriller with comic book characters.
Yeah. I mean, you could have literally replaced, Captain America with like a generic action star, and it would have worked still.
Absolutely, and I think that's really the genius of that, and not only that, but it really built on Captain America first Avenger, because whereas you are like really liking Captain America, I walked out of the first Captain America and I was like, this only existed for Avengers. Like, that's the only reason this film was made.
You know, I don't necessarily disagree with that. It's maybe because I don't know when the last time I rewatched that film, I don't disagree with that. Because it totally is that movie. I mean, it's in the title. Like, it exists for the Avengers and the Avengers alone. Where I think Winter Soldier exists to be its own thing, and Civil War exists to be not necessarily a Captain America movie, but to be, I guess, like really an Avengers movie. It was probably one of the best Avengers movies we've had, without having the word Avengers in the title. So. I would not disagree with Captain America 1 being kind of just a setup thing, but I think I enjoyed that one, and I enjoyed that one because of the setting, because it was a period piece for the most part. That's what got me about that movie, and I thought it was really well done. I would probably say Iron Man 1 is better than First Avenger. I don't know where First Avenger ranks on my list. I would have to sit down and like really kind of rewatch all these movies to formulate my list. But I don't think First Avenger shows up in my top 5. I think Winter Soldier does.
Top 5. Probably Guardians would both Guardians would probably take my top 2.
Okay.
And then I would probably say Iron Man 3's in there somewhere.
Okay, interesting pick.
I liked again, going back to the whole psychology of superheroes.
Oh, yeah.
I liked that whole PTSD thing, and the whole Mandarin twist. Everyone else was like angry about it. I had no idea who the Mandarin was.
Yeah, I'm not I'm like a fake comic book geek, because I'm more so like I really kind of only know certain things history wise, and everything else I'm more of just like, I'm a pop culture geek, and it just so happens to be that I really get the comic book characters more than anything else.
Right. That's awesome.
It's because I'm not like, I don't have like a deep rich history with comic books like a lot of people do. I enjoy reading them to this day still, but I don't like go. I'm not a hardcore comic book reader. Like even when I was a kid, I wasn't a hardcore comic book reader. I was always more into like the cinematic stuff, and I'm using that term loosely because I'm talking about the 90s cartoons, like 90s Spider-Man, 90s X-Men, 90s Batman, 90s Superman. They were all my jam back in the day. And like I remember reading, like I had like an X-Men book that was like just talking about each mutant and their powers, and it was all based off of the animated series. And I think that's, oddly enough, it was based off the animated series, but it's also the way I found out like you would have to cut off a mutant's head to kill them or something. It was a really weird, I want to say kids book, because I think I bought it at school. But yeah, I mean, that's how I experienced comic book characters, was actually through media other than comic books, really.
That's actually that's how a lot of people do that. And when you so my wife and I, for what we do, when we go to churches, like, yes, we exist as a podcast, but again, kind of going back to, I don't know really, guys, what your listeners believe, or, we believe that hope lies in Jesus. And when you're getting into, talk to church crowds, most people that we've come across and we're like, oh, well, what do you guys do? Well, we talk about nerd stuff. Like, we just talk about geek pop culture stuff. And they're like, oh, well, you mean like the Marvel movies and the DC movies? And we're like, yeah, well, we also talk about the comic books. And they're like, I don't know anything about the comic books. I just know TV, like cinema. Like that's pretty much the main population. And just last week on our show, we had one of our guests on there was Mark Swan, who is now an independent comic creator, but most people would probably recognize his work from, animation and Space Jam and Land Before Time and American Tail and stuff like that. And one of the stories we had talked about was the Silver Sable and Black Cat movie that we're getting. There was a report coming out recently that, it's going to lead up to a all-females Avengers style film.
Oh, interesting. And
it's like, I don't know how true that is. It was just a rumor report, but at the same time, one of the points that was made in the conversation was, does enough of the population know these characters?
But you know what? I think we live in a world now where, no one knew about Iron Man, 10, 15 years ago, or however long it's been. I think we live in a world where now it's just I think you can get away with a lot more, and especially that you can make that such an original flick that I think the benefit of taking characters that no one knows but they're from a rich history is that you can screw with that backstory as much as you want, and you're not going to piss a lot of people off. To my understanding, Guardians does not really follow the comic book that closely.
Not at all. Not at all.
And I would, again, this outs me as a poor comic book guy, but I wouldn't change anything about those Guardians movies. They both made me tear up and cry. They're really good movies, and I understand that you need someone would call me a hypocrite because one of my issues with Man of Steel was that it didn't really follow the character close enough, and I guess I am a hypocrite because I do say that about Man of Steel, and I'll stick by that. But I don't think you need to, at least not all the time. I don't think you need to stick by so closely to the source of material, especially when no one knows who. I know about Black Cat and Silver. I don't even know if I know Silver Sable from the cartoon series, but I know Black Cat. I've read comics with Black Cat, and I've watched the cartoon series, but that's all I know about her. So you could really mess with that origin story, and I think make something pretty unique if you wanted to. And I think people would see it, especially if you're gonna promote it as Marvel or Sony Marvel or whatever they're doing over there. I think you'll make a couple bucks off of it.
Yeah, and I think that Arrow is a great example of taking lesser known characters that haven't that to an audience you don't, to the general population they're just cool characters, but to the the actual hardcore fans it's cool to see their takes on those characters, but it's also kind of frustrating at the same time because what is it I think a great example of that was the first of 2 seasons. You introduced characters like Count Vertigo and Brother Blood and Cyrus Gold, who was actually supposed to become Solomon Grundy. Mm-hmm. You have all those characters that are nothing like their comic counterparts, and while it was cool to see their takes on those characters, I also think it would have been cool to see the takes on the whole, just what their comic counterparts would have been, because I think that they would have thrived in those worlds. And that was my biggest complaint about this last season of Flash, was the whole Savitar switch. Mm-hmm. Because if you know anything about the comics, Savitar is an occultist, and cults just are fascinating, and when you have a whole army of people, they create a truly menacing adversary. And plot twist, it's Barry Allen from the future. I was really? That's what you want to go with? You took a great character and destroyed him.
See, and that's the benefit of being I know nothing about the Flash. I am, again, a poor comic book, but I also don't know much about unless your name's Batman, and probably Superman to a degree. I don't know much about DC because I never read anything but Batman. And I would say, again, I guess I really only know Superman because of he's been in media for so long. DC really only had Batman and Superman for the longest time, so I've seen them in other forms of media. But So I know nothing about the Flash. My real first experience with the Flash, aside from appearances in the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited and whatnot, was this show, the CW show. So I have no idea who Savitar is really supposed to be in the comic book world. What I think is dumb is I'm hoping this rumor isn't true. What I think is dumb is that they're saying that Barry could be the villain of season 4, but we literally just had Barry be the villain of season 3. So I'll think that's dumb if that comes to fruition, because I don't want to see him be the villain again.
I just don't want another speedster.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that.
I'm done with that. I love Zoom, and when they announced that you're gonna have Dr. Alchemy, I loved that whole not only having Dr. Alchemy, because I just thought that his character design looked awesome. He was a great villain, and he was voiced by Tobin Bell. So every time he opened his mouth, I was like, "Do you want to play a game?" Yes. Yes. And but that whole twist, and I was like, man, that's done way too early. You shouldn't introduce Savitar. They should have just kept Alchemy, let Alchemy be a villain, let Barry feel the mistakes of the whole Flashpoint universe.
I agree. I guess looking back at season 3, there could have been, there was probably more mistakes than there were triumphs, but I don't know. I think I'm just so apologetic for that show because I love it so much. I have so many blinders when it comes to that show. It's my everything. It's my favorite, one of my favorite, if not favorite, show on television right now. So I have a lot of blinders when it comes to that show, and I'll go back and read stuff and be like, yeah, I guess I get it. I get why people don't like this, but I'm very apologetic to that show.
Yeah, and I mean it's okay. You're passionate about that kind of stuff, and I'm that way with Arrow. I will admit, yes, the Ra's al Ghul and the Damien Darks, they weren't the greatest seasons, but they still had great episodes.
Absolutely.
I think the episode with Deadshot, I can watch that, and I still tear up every time I watch that, because that is such a great standalone episode. It brought so much depth to that character.
Yeah. All right, it's getting late for us East Coast boys here. I know I'm getting a little tired, and we barely talked about you. I feel like we are going to have you on the show again, because we can just talk forever about nonsense, it seems. So Victims and Villains is your podcast. And it sounds like you guys do some really great things. Why don't you give it the proper plugs it deserves, and whatnot?
Okay, so before I plug the show, I just want to let anyone know that if you are someone that is listening to this right now and is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, you just know that hope is real. It's not something that we've sat here tonight. We've talked a lot about DC and Marvel and comics and film, and it's not just, hope isn't just an idea that someone writes up and thinks that it's a great concept for inspiration to motivate a hero or to destroy a villain. No, it's a reality, and it's within your grasp. So if you guys or someone is struggling, they can reach out to us. We would love to connect them with a counselor, or you guys can call 1-800-273-8255 anonymously, or you can even text anonymously to 741-741, because every breath you take is precious. Every time that you are allowed to open your eyes and see, it's a blessing. And just know that whatever you're going through, it's just a season, and that life does get better. But you guys can find us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/victimsandvillains, and victimsandvillains.net is our official site. We have all of our back episodes, all of our future events, including speaking events, conventions, so on and so forth. But we also have ways that you guys can also get involved with what we're doing as far as the anti-suicide, stopping suicide revolution that we are drumming up to start. And if you guys also know someone that is struggling, our website offers all kinds of awesome tools to connect you with counselors and so on and so forth. So it's victimsandvillains.net. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and every Tuesday and Wednesday we are streaming live on Core Radio.
Nice. And when is your Philadelphia podcast festival appearance?
That is a great question because I don't remember off the top of my head. We are going to be July 15th. We start at 11 a.m. and we are at Amalgam Comics and Coffee Shop.
That is such a great venue. We actually just did a show there on June 4th. And it is such a great place. You guys, after talking to you, I'm going to start listening to your show now that I have talked to you, and I don't need to have a surprise conversation with you anymore. But based off our conversations today, I think that's a great place for you guys to go. It's cool little, not little. I mean, have you been to Amalgam? I don't know where you live in relation to the city, but
I don't. We live roughly around like 3 hours away. We live 30 minutes west of Gettysburg.
Wow, okay.
So I've never actually been to Philadelphia.
Oh, gotcha.
But it was just kind of one of those things that it was like, if we get it, we get it kind of thing. Like, we're just going to enter our name in here, and if it happens, it happens. But suicide is as big as suicide is, like, and as little as people know, we constantly traveling to educate people and connect people to heal brokenness, essentially.
And there, I mean, like I said, that venue is real great, and I think, just as I said, based off this conversation, you'll at least love the environment. It is such a cool. I don't know how comic book stores are around you, but the comic book stores near me in the I live in Bucks County, so I'm about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour north of the city. They're all small, tight, hard to maneuver because there's so much crap in there. Amalgam Comics and Coffeehouse it's very welcoming. It's very warming. It's such a cool vibe. It's you'll have a lot of fun there on the 15th. I'll be at Tattooed Moms that weekend. I'm helping run things there, but so I'll miss your live show. But for people who are it's not on the same time as my show, so I can feel happy about saying go see Victims and Villains on July 15th at Amalgam Comics and Coffeehouse. Grab a coffee, sit down, watch the show. The Philadelphia Podcast Festival is in its 5th year, and they're doing, Nathan and Tegan are doing some real special things with it. They 5 years doing it, 55 plus shows this year. Victims and Villains are it's their first year. Show them that the Philadelphia Podcast Fest is well worth investing their time in so that they come back next year, because it's such a special city to be doing a podcast in. And these guys have a special message, it sounds like, and it's I'm actually really sad that I'm not going to be able to see it live. I can't wait to dive into your show and dive into just the evolution of your geekery talk to whatever your message of hope now. Really excited to become a fan.
Well, thank you. We're excited to have you, and so yeah, we're super stoked, and my wife's like super excited that it's a comic book shop and a coffee house in the same place.
It's so cool. It's it is probably the coolest, if not maybe second coolest comic book store I've been to, but it's so cool. You guys will love it. I'm sure you'll, even if you don't love it for your show, you'll just love it as a geek people. You'll love the environment. And Ariel, who runs the store, is super nice, super chill. They're all super cool there. You will, like I said, I think Steel Empire, the guys who put on the podcast, The Quest for Magic and Steel, I think they're running sound there for you. He made us sound like $1 million when I did my show on June 4th. It's going to be a good time. The Philadelphia Podcast Festival is going to be over the course of 2 weekends this year at multiple venues: Tattooed Moms, Amalgam Comics and Coffeehouse, Kitchen Table Gallery. I think Philomoka. I think Philadelphia Improv Theater. You name it, it's probably happening in some way. And Everything is Awesome will be there July 16th at Tattooed Moms at 2 p.m. Victim of Villains, July 15th at Amalgam Comics Coffeehouse. Make sure you check them all out. All the links to Victims and Villains will be in our show notes whenever this airs, and which is in the middle of this podcast festival goodness. At least for us, we're celebrating in big times. Josh, thanks for doing the show. You definitely have to come back on again. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thanks, yeah, and that's always thanks for having me. I always love coming on and doing shows because you never know really what you're gonna expect and how conversation flows. But it just flows so natural on this show. I love it.
Yeah, it's I set out and I think I'll be airing it really soon because our 10-year anniversary, or my 10-year anniversary, is coming up. I recently listened back to the first interview I ever did, and it is awful. I am actually a terrible interviewer. Why I do an interview show, I don't know. But I'm really good at having a conversation. So I knew when I started this show that I had to use that to my advantage, and that means I just do zero prep work, which may make me seem like a giant dick, but it's really just because I want to have a good show. So thank you for appreciating that, Josh.
Anytime.
All right. For Everything is Awesome, you can find us on Twitter at Real Awesome Pod. You can find me on Twitter, where I do most of my tweeting and twatting, at That Nerdy Kev. You can find us on the Core Temp Arts Podcast Network on coretemparts.com, and of course our home site is awesomepodcast.com. For Everything is Awesome, I'm Kev, and we've been awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Core Temp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Core Temp Arts shows, visit coretemparts.com.